Today, I'm here at Chickamauga Battlefield in North Georgia. Yes, it's a Civil War site, but today I'm here to learn about World War I history through a ranger guided tour. That's coming up next.
Take about the next hour to hour and a half or so, give or take. Some of it's going to depend on how long-winded I get and how chatty we all get. And we're going to explore a couple of sites here on the battlefield that were used by the Army during the First World War. And so the way this will work is we're going to, actually our first stop is going to actually kind of be here in the visitor center. We'll move out back so that we can see, we'll stay in the shade for everybody, so that we can kind of see off into town a little bit, talk a little bit about kind of the creation of the park, and then we'll move south. We'll stop out at the site of what was called Camp Greenleaf, talk a little bit about that, and then we'll actually end up at what's called Snodgrass Hill. If I time this right, and it's a big if, but if I time this right, we'll get to Snodgrass Hill about 10 or 15 minutes before we have a 3:30 program scheduled to go start at Snodgrass Hill, where some living historians are going to do a little short presentation. They're dressed up like World War I soldiers. They've got World War I gear, equipment. I know you guys were up there earlier. And so they've got like a mock trench set up. And so if I time this right, we'll get up there. And so our tour will kind of end with them starting their 3:30 program. We may get up there a few minutes early and kind of mill about and kind of hang out around the cabin a little bit. But that's kind of the game plan. So the way this will work when we actually go out is this will be a car caravan tour. So we'll start out back here. But once we actually go out into the battlefield, you guys will get in your vehicles. I'll be in a white pickup truck, and we'll kind of drive out into the battlefield, kind of in a line of cars, and we'll head out and stop at a couple of places. Sound cool? All right. Well, let's so we can hear a little better. Let's head out back here to the back porch. We've got some benches out there, and they are mercifully set in the shade. All right. Well, we'll kind of get rocking here officially. I'm turning on that radio so it doesn't start larking on me. Well, again, welcome to Chickamauga Battlefield. Here on this location in September of 1863, just kind of start off with a little bit of a Civil War story. In September of 1863, the Union and Confederate armies clashed right here where we're sitting. Over, kind of militarily, this is over control of the city of Chattanooga, just up the road here. Over the course of 3 days in September of 1863, about 125,000 men fought here. About 30 to 35,000 were killed, wounded, captured, or missing. So this is definitely one of the large battles of the Civil War. And so this is one of the original preserved battlefield sites anywhere in the country. This park, Chickamauga and Chattanooga National Military Park, was established by an act of Congress in August of 1890. So we are a pretty old park. A couple of years ago, we just celebrated our 125th anniversary as a park. So we're definitely one of the oldest parks in the country in terms of a national park site. However, in those days, in the 1890s, there was no National Park Service. As an agency, we famously just turned 100 last year. We had the National Park Service Centennial. But there was no National Park Service when this park was created. So who was running this park? The War Department, the Army. National military parks were intended to be exactly what they are described, what they're called, parks for the military. The idea of a national military park is to be a landscape where where military officers especially can come out and kind of use these battlefields to kind of study the last war as they prepare for the next war. It's kind of my cheesy little cliche phrase I use. But I think it's very descriptive of kind of why this park was originally established. The War Department and Congress didn't come out here to turn this into a big memorial, which sounds a little weird to say today. They didn't necessarily mean for this to be this commemorative landscape, so to speak. Now, for a lot of the veterans that fought here, this is absolutely a memorial, a commemorative landscape. But in terms of that official legislation, this is intended to be, again, an outdoor classroom. And we can still see vestiges of that today. If you look up, kind of got this row of cannon up here, and there's that cast iron tablet. Those tablets dot the battlefield today and tell us exactly where soldiers were at any given point during the Battle of Chickamauga in September of 1863. The purpose of those tablets, the purpose of these little stone position markers out here is so that a soldier coming back here in the 1890s or early 1900s can kind of study battlefield tactics in real time. You can walk out to that tablet, see which battery is positioned right there, what time are they there, and it gives you a description of what they did, and then you can go look up and figure out where else that battery was, go find their tablet somewhere else, and you can kind of follow them across the battlefield. The vision for this was that young officers would come here and study those to kind of get ready for the next war. That's not a vehicle you see riding down the road every day. Double take on that a little bit. I'll let him go by so y'all can hear a little better.
Noise pollution.
Good.
Noise pollution.
A little bit. Well, we're right on a very busy road, and this was a busy road in 1863, which is one of the reasons why the battle was kind of fought here. Wasn't this busy, though. They didn't quite have the internal combustion engine figured out yet. But anyway, so this park, the plan was for soldiers to come here and use this place to train. And so starting in the Spanish-American War in 1898, they established what was called Camp Thomas here on Chickamauga Battlefield. And tens of thousands of young men came and trained here before they went and fought in the Spanish-American War. A good number of those guys ended up dying here on the Chickamauga Battlefield, which was a little surprising. When you kind of think about people dying on a battlefield, you think of it as being a combat thing. A lot of those Spanish-American War guys are here dying of disease. So kind of after the Spanish-American War, things kind of start to go quiet here on the battlefield again. They're putting monuments up, but again, these monuments are intended to tell you exactly which regiment is where. The War Department is still intending for this to be an outdoor classroom. Now, they really start to grow this up in 1903. 1903 and 1904, they create a military post here, a permanent military post called Fort Oglethorpe, which we can see right behind me, the vestiges of this, the last remnants of it. These big buildings, people come in here and ask us about these all the time. Those huge buildings that you see are what are still standing of the barracks that were constructed at Fort Oglethorpe during the early 1900s. And so those actually kind of form a big circle that at the time was flat, level. It was a parade ground. People today still call it the polo fields or Barnhart Circle. So that's Fort Oglethorpe. And that is home of a cavalry regiment, and this is kind of their training facilities. You go up there, that's where your barracks are, that's where your officers club is, that's where all of that kind of stuff is happening. You come out here to train. Well, as the United States prepared for war in 1916, we got to start growing. Now I say 1916 to kind of emphasize that a little funny. During the 1916 presidential election, President Woodrow Wilson was running on a re-election campaign. The slogan is, he kept us out of war. We're not going to go to war. But everybody kind of knows in the background, we're probably going to war. And so in March of 1916, Congress passed an authorization to expand Fort Oglethorpe. I'm just going to read a really small snippet of this. Don't worry, I'm not going to sit here and read legislation for the next hour and a half. That would bore everyone, including me. So this is passed March 7th, 1916, and it's called, the title of it is a bill to enlarge the military post of Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia, and making appropriations thereafter. That doesn't quite have the same ring as a good catchy piece of legislation today. But it says, be it enacted by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America and Congress assembled, that the Secretary of War be and is hereby authorized and directed to enlarge the military post of Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia, to the capacity of a brigade of cavalry, provided that to enable the Secretary of War to carry out the provisions of this act, there is hereby appropriated from any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated the sum of $1,540,420. Don't worry, that number's not going to be on a test later, okay? So you have to remember that exact number. We'll round that to 1.5 million. Or so much thereof as may be necessary. That's dangerous language right there. For the erection of the necessary quarters, barracks, mess buildings, stables, storerooms, and other buildings, including administration buildings, for extensions to hospital, bakery, lighting system, pumping and ice plant, water distributing system, and sewer system, and for all other necessary improvements. Now that's a dangerous piece of legislation, because it says, we appropriate $1.5 million, or so much thereof as may be necessary. So 1.5 mil is kind of like the suggested, but Congress is basically, they're authorized to spend as much money as they want to build. They give you a list of types of buildings, or for all other necessary improvements. Fort Oglethorpe begins to expand rapidly and becomes an induction center for men out of the Chattanooga region who are being drafted and joining, some of them being drafted, some of them are outright joining the Army in 1916. When the United States officially declared war in April of 1917, that's when things really get big here. In addition to Fort Oglethorpe, there are 3 military encampments that are established here where we're at today on Chickamauga Battlefield, inside the boundaries of the National Military Park. We'll kind of do them in order a little bit for where we're going to go, in kind of reverse order, I guess. One is called Camp Forest, which is located on top of Snodgrass Hill, which is where our tour is going to end. That was an engineering camp where they were training people how to use equipment that engineers might need when you go to France to fight overseas. Now, of course, those of you guys know a little bit about World War I, you know that the most important tool you need for that's a shovel. They're doing a lot of digging up there. We'll see that when we get up there. There's also called Camp Greenleaf, which is a large medical training facility. That's going to be our kind of next tour stop. But right here, where we're sitting, right at the site of the visitor center today, was called Camp Warden MacLean. And so if you kind of look around right here, you can look up, you see the barracks, you see the nice building behind us, the very modern, the glass structure and everything, the theater back there, the busy road with the noise pollution, right? But if you were sitting right here in 1917, you would be in the middle of an officer training camp, a very large officer training camp. So this is officially kind of the barracks for the officers of Fort Oglethorpe, but they're training young men to be new officers right here. And so this whole field where the visitor center is today, stretching across the road to where kind of the park headquarters is, all of that is just filled with barracks. And the barracks are all dodging the monuments. That's kind of the fun thing, is the monuments and cannon and the tablets, all that stuff's still out there. So you're kind of positioning everything around that. And they're using, eventually they fill up that whole field out there with barracks as well. But for a while they're using that field right there as kind of a rifle range. And so that's what I want to show you guys, my first picture here. And we'll pass this around. To get you guys oriented, this is a photograph taken of a rifle pit, and I'll pass it around here in just a second. Of a training rifle pit, and where these guys are positioned, they are literally sitting basically where our visitor center front desk is today, and they're firing into this kind of hillside where the theater kind of goes up into that embankment there, and you can kind of see that embankment there. And so I'm gonna pass this around, and you kind of see me. These guys are firing. There's a young officer. He's got his binoculars out. My favorite's the guy on the right who's about to toss a hand grenade. So we'll kind of pass that around a little bit. I love that picture because it really kind of illustrates the idea that's going to kind of be the theme for this program, for this tour. It illustrates the idea that this landscape, this place as we see it today, for us, this is hallowed ground, right? This is the place where 125,000 Americans fought and died. But for the Army in 1917, this is the place where we're going to prepare people to go somewhere else to fight and die. This hallowed ground, as President Lincoln kind of famously said, you know, the Civil War ensured that, you know, government of the people, by the people, for the people shall not perish from the earth. Well, World War I is the war that's supposed to make the world safe for democracy. They're using this battlefield they're almost sacrificing this battlefield in order to win a war to ensure that the ideals won in this war are kind of made safe the world over for the 20th century. And so as we kind of explore the battlefield a little bit, we'll kind of keep coming back to that idea. Now before we move on, there is kind of one other Fort Oglethorpe story that I want to share with you guys that I think is really fascinating for kind of this end of the park. Right up the road, so when you leave the battlefield today, we're not going to head up there with our tour, just because we'll lose everybody in traffic. Hey, there's just a World War I era vehicle. Perfect timing, right? I don't know how old that is, but there we go. I timed that perfectly, guys. Just up the road here on the right, where the Kmart is today, is something that I think is really fascinating. That's a neat juxtaposition, or a neat a way of looking at this landscape. And what do we choose to preserve and not choose to preserve? So Fort Oglethorpe is by World War I is expanded kind of all the way up, kind of almost a little past the intersection where Battlefield Parkway is today, and where the Kmart is turns into a POW camp for captured German sailors. When the United States declared war in April of 1917, they there were several German naval vessels that had been docked in harbors, principally like in Philadelphia and places like that. Well, as soon as we declare war, those guys are all now enemy military personnel who are hanging out in our harbor. So they are kind of all immediately arrested and are sent to the POW camps both here at Fort Oglethorpe, but also at Fort McPherson, a little farther south of here. And so, if you kind of imagine in 1917 and 1918, German POWs are some of the guys who are out here doing some of the early kind of labor around the park a little bit to get it ready for all of this coming in, all of this happening. And to kind of further kind of confuse this a little bit, I love throwing out confusing stories. About 1 out of 5 Union soldiers in the Army of the Cumberland that fought here at Chickamauga is German born. So we have monuments that are out here to Union U.S. Army regiments that are almost all German. And 60 years later, we have German POWs right up the road here, which is, I think, is kind of fascinating. By World War II, they actually moved the POW camp into the battlefield for a little while, which is kind of fascinating. So we're hanging out specifically, though, right now at Camp Warden MacLean, which is an officer training camp. If you get on Google Earth and look at like satellite imagery for this field right around the visitor center today, you can still see kind of rows of, you can see out in the grass kind of where it almost looks like there's still rows. If you go walking through that field out there, and I wouldn't recommend doing it until they cut the grass, you'll get covered in ticks. But go walk across that field next time they cut the grass, and you can still see like little rows of concrete kind of stretching all over that field. And those are kind of remnants of this camp that was here. So what we're going to do at this time is, well, we'll kind of sit tight for a second, see if any questions, comments, concerns, or anything. But what we're going to do is we're going to go get into our vehicles, and we're going to head out to the site of the largest of the World War I camps here called Camp Greenleaf.